afternoon, Professor Grace. How are you?
Very good, thank you.
Okay, is it a very great pleasure to meet you here, and it's a great moment to have a podcast with you. Here also Mr. Hery Prasetyo. Good afternoon, Mr. Hery.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Okay, please let me introduce both of you to our viewers. Okay, we have Professor Grace Cheng here. She is a professor in the Political Science Department at San Diego State University. She is also the Center for Human Rights Director in the College of Arts and Letters. She teaches courses on human rights, political violence, and other topics. Professor Cheng's specialization is in comparative politics, focusing on Asia. Her interests are in comparative perspective on human rights, peace and security, as well as the study of conflict and post-conflict transition. Okay, meanwhile, Mr. Hery Prasetyo is a Coordinator of Sociology Department. He is also the Cultural Formation of Changing Society Coordinator Research Center, and also a member of the Center for Human Rights, Multiculturalism and Migrations at the University of Jember. Mr. Hery's area of interest and works include cultural sociology, postcolonialism, subaltern studies, globalization, and development. Wow, that's a wide range of interest, I think. Okay, right.
Very interesting.
Yes, we will discuss several issues today, including human rights, ecological politics, and indigenous people. I hope it will be interesting. Okay. The question will be raised by both Mr. Hery and I, but I think you can also ask us. Yeah. Okay. Okay. I go first. Professor Grace,
Yes.
why have human rights become your interest? Is there any agenda that you want to address?
Oh, I mean, I was interested in inequality and injustice since I was very young because I grew up in New York City, and I've just met people from so many different backgrounds, and there's a lot of discrimination, there's a lot of unfairness, and so I always was interested in these kinds of issues, like how can we think of ways to improve ourselves as a society? We don't treat people differently, and that we are fair in how people can enjoy the benefits of our society. And of course we have a very long way to go. So, and I find this just something I care about. So it's something I started to study.
Okay. Thank you for your what is called maybe ideological background or some your experience with these human rights issues. However, is it still urgent to study about human rights in the USA, where this country claims to be a country who have everything that based on human rights? For my short reading about American history, of course, human rights issues something like they always claim. However, they have a dark story about how the state maintain the issue of human rights, about the Indian community, about how they treat another places like in Hawaii, another place that they still conduct what is called modern colonization. This is really important for you, for your student, for your university to explore the issue of human rights in the US.
Yeah, I think that is a very good point that you made about the contradictions in the United States, that it often, the government anyway, but also many people often say how important and central Americans are as an example of how we practice human rights, but we really fall short, to say the least. And I think that now this is something which I really feel very privileged to be able to do, is to establish a Center for Human Rights at San Diego State University. I mean, it's a growing number in the United States, and it's pretty recent. It's not been around for a very long time. I think the study of human rights is also relatively new. It's you know, it has its background, a lot of legal writings, but as far as like a very interdisciplinary, now there's many different people and all different disciplinary backgrounds who are pursuing it and working together. Like I know one of the topics we're talking about today. So you know, I think these centers, we're now trying to develop more like a consortium, so we have more interaction. And you know, like my center and another center in my college is planning a conference, and we're reaching out to different people who work on the US-Mexico border, which is where San Diego is. And there's a lot of, you know, human rights issues there because it's an artificial border, and I know we're going to talk about territory today. So yeah, I mean, and that has impacts on the communities who are there, right? The indigenous communities and others who have settled there over the centuries, because San Diego is a Spanish word, so it was settled by the Spanish much earlier, and these communities are, yeah, they're split. You know, the resources, right, are impacted by this border. I think that the way that the border is policed by both sides and in coordination, both the US and Mexico governments coordinate, I think, the border patrol. That has an impact on the communities on both sides as well. So there's, of course, everywhere in the world, there's migration as a reaching kind of a crisis, you know, in many parts of the world, and certainly in the US-Mexico border, you know, and I think these issues of why people migrate, and they take enormous risks by leaving their home, traveling very dangerous routes with very little that they can bring with them, because, you know, for fear, cannot bring a lot of money. Many of them don't have money anyway, and so I think that, you know, human rights conditions are behind why there are these kinds of displacements, as well as, you know, these kinds of like economic and other activities that make people more insecure. And so I think, you know, I think the human rights situation in front of us is very, very obvious. So I think a lot of students are interested, a lot of community groups are active and organizing, and you know, it's an opportunity. What we are trying to do is bring everybody together at this conference we will have next spring. And yeah, I think it's, to answer your question, yes, it's very important to study human rights.
About the issue of human rights. Also in my department, we have a course about human rights. It's relatively new. We doesn't have class yet because we're still planning and make the syllabus. However, in this context, what I like to highlight is, if the USA government, with all the contradiction and the paradox of human rights, became one of many international actors. Also, US always claim that what they have done in many countries, such as in Iran, Vietnam, and also in Indonesia. I'm talking about the 65
Yes.
political situation. They always use the name human rights. They always use the name of democracy. Always try to become a good world police. However, we can see that, I don't know, we can trust US anymore. I don't know, we can trust Europe or something like United Nations, who can address the issue of human rights on the normative claim, since many of cases make us doesn't want to see how they treat their own country. In this issue, is with all the paradox, with all the complexity, who can become the crucial actor to to make the world believe that human rights is one of many alternatives. It's one of the best alternatives that we can try together and make what the United Nations call as the sustainable development issues. I hope you can make the relation of my question about our Indonesian experience about the USA, why the government, then the many of think tank that who was studied in the USA and make all the development scenario, but also they was marginalized many of communities in Indonesia. In Vietnam, we can see also the same thing under Vietnamese war. In Iran and now in Ukraine, the problem is who can be the central actor for this movement of human rights movement, and also what kind of ideological basis that we can become our basis to make a new social movement based on human rights, equality, and also maybe forestry issues, and also the local community and also the village. That's my question that always make me wonder is it still, or is it something we can trust to fight together in the human rights issues?
Wow.
Yes.
No, not. It's a big question.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think the point you make that the U.S. and Europe are not really plausible leaders in the world human rights movement because of some of their practice. I mean, some of their policies and behavior and their support of authoritarian regimes and their, this kind of peaceful existence is kind of always not. It doesn't seem to be that important. It seems like military solutions,
yes,
right? Like NATO going into Afghanistan or Libya, right? Or the U.S. and some other coalition going into Iraq, and then it seems like there's a strong preference, right, for using force nowadays, and so. Yeah, I think that's a really good question. Who is a plausible leader, or who would be plausible leaders in promoting human rights? Who would people trust, right? Like, because they are not hypocritical and their actions are not contrary to what the purpose of human rights is, which is to recognize the dignity and worth and value of human beings and human life. So. Yeah, I think, so one of the things, I'm a political scientist, but one of the things I've been working on is I've started to teach a class that I developed at San Diego State called History of Human Rights. And because when I studied human rights, like I said, as a student and reading all of these journals, it's very Western-centric, and there's an assumption that like all of these ideas came out of the West, and the West is the main driver, and everybody else just needs to learn. But I kind of, in my other studies, because I studied Asia, and I like history, so I studied other society. I felt like this is not. I didn't see them promoting any of this really. I don't know where this is from. And so now there's a lot of good good history being written about how human rights evolved. That isn't like it started with the Magna Carta in England, right? Like it always starts, and then the American Revolution and the Declaration of Independence, and then suddenly, you know, the Universal Declaration. It's not. That's not the history. There's so many gaps, and I think this course that I'm teaching is really forcing me to, or allowing me to spend time reading all of this history and learning about the really, actually, among the great powers, so-called great powers, the Western powers after World War II, they had really no interest in human rights. Like, people were very, you know, very disappointed in how it was kind of put aside, and the central issue was like a certain notion of security, global security, and also that, you know, I just came from the Netherlands where I worked this summer in Leiden, and just reading about how actually after World War II, the European imperial powers wanted to continue their colonies. They had no idea, right? It was not in their thinking that they should not go back. You know, like in Indonesia, for example, right? When Japanese took over, the Dutch had to, you know, step aside. In France as well, right? They just came back. Like they thought, well, this is ours, and you know, the Japanese are the ones who are wrong. And you know, I thought, now that there's a lot of very good history, I think that corrects our thinking, you know, and that governments in the West have been able to manipulate to make us think that they are the leaders, they are the ones to trust. And it's not that Western societies and governments are just, you know, untrustworthy and bad and imperialistic. I mean, I think there's plenty of, I think, skepticism to go around all governments. So, you know, I think we have to be skeptical about that, to say but yes, obviously the West are the leaders. I think that, you know, the leadership, I don't know if it can only be through government, through pleading with governments to, oh, help us here. Like there has to be a way to empower society, social, you know, civil society groups and people networking, and I see that in some cases, you know, like some very strong movements. And so I think as a world, right, if you do empower or rely too much on certain entities, they can become too powerful and unaccountable. Right, global governance. One of the problems, right, is they're not accountable to people. So, despite they might have good intentions, but yeah, how do we have a world that is not so militaristic, right? That's not so prone to conflict and a new arms race, and where, you know, we take human rights into consideration as more of a priority.
Okay, this is kind of, I don't know, maybe a little bit funny for me. This morning I told my students that because we all several times discussing about what is independence, and then we discussing about, I never heard the notion about history from below, where we believe that a society, the power of civil society will take over the military, like the military governmental. But I think in several ways, military is not that bad. I mean, no, it's just, is it because the history of military, perhaps in Indonesia, is not so good with the previous history, for example, the movement, September movement ya, PKI, what is PKI? Partai Komunis Indonesia, Indonesia. Is Black History where the military, what is then become very repressive in the order of Suharto era, and people think that it hurts us as ordinary people like that. But what if we didn't take the military as one of the power, what is it, in a country or in a state? I think we cannot also count on the power of a civil society, just civil society itself, right? But also, I think there is we need to take the military in I don't know, perhaps not in the big proportion to manage the country, but if we don't have any military, I don't know, perhaps is there any country or there is a country that don't have a military?
Costa Rica does not have a military.
Yeah, Costa Rica doesn't have military. Yeah, I know there's several countries. Yeah, don't have military, and they work just fine and democratic, I think. But perhaps in the case of Indonesia, I say to my student, do you know Korea and Japan? Japan have what is the spirit of their what is samurai spirit that, and defense mechanism, it become defense mechanism of their country. And Korea, South Korea, I think also. But how about Indonesia don't have what is military? What is in English? Military duty, I think. So I think our civil society in Indonesia, don't have any skills in military. So I just joking to my student. So when someday America or something else attack your country, what can you do? Because you don't have any basic skills in military equipment or in military. I think we need to read the military as a not too repressive group or repressive element or alliance, but we still need military skill to perhaps make the country safe. I don't know. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah, I think when I say militarism, I don't mean against the military, but like to look at the military as like the key to everything, right? The key to our problems, or it's a dominant, really. And I think that, from what happened after 9/11, like there have to be a military action of that sort, right? In Afghanistan. I mean, there were debates at the time, right? Like about whether the Taliban is directly should they be considered responsible for the actions of Al Qaeda? Are there other ways of taking over or making sure, right, that Afghanistan can be secured, right, from Al Qaeda continuing with its activities that threaten global security? So definitely there's threats. Do we have to take that kind of action? Because now, 20 years later, the Taliban are back. Like, do we solve anything, right, with the military? And so I think, there's a legitimate role for the military, but it's definitely not aggression or expansion. Those are not legitimate uses, because they are against other people's interests. They cause unnecessary suffering. So using military force should be very carefully weighed after many options are attempted. And I think Libya is another example, right? The NATO intervention in Libya in, was it 2011 or I went to Nepal a few, 10 years ago or something, and I'd never been there, and I was very excited and also very anxious, because it's just a part of the world I never went to. And so I found out one of my colleagues went there before, so I asked him. He was like, oh yeah, come talk to me. So I asked him, and he was telling me he went in the 70s, and he said that he was in Istanbul at the time, and so he had a plan. He was planning to go by bus from Istanbul to Nepal, but then he started hanging out with people, and then he just took the plane, and he said he really regrets that. And I was thinking, can you think about all the countries you have to drive through to get from Istanbul to Kathmandu? All of those countries are destroyed by conflict. They're so unsafe. Like you gotta go through Syria, you gotta go through Iran, you have to go through Pakistan. I mean, their security situation there is so dangerous. There's no way you could do that drive anymore. Can you imagine? And it's beautiful, right? Yes. So anyway, I feel like that's, I think when we talk about using the humanitarian intervention, which is popular in the 90s, right? Let's use the military to stop abuses. Like, I don't know, like, I think that produces its own problems. Not that the military doesn't have a role and a lot, like, legitimate, is a legitimate institute, has legitimate functions, but it produces its own problems. And I think so many of our problems are problems that we caused from an earlier action, like our support for the war against the Soviets in Afghanistan. That created the conditions for the Taliban to take over. That created the conditions for a group like Al-Qaeda to get together. I mean, these are threats of our own making, and our answer is more of the same. It's like insanity, right? You keep doing the same thing over and over for the same, but the effect is always the same. Nothing changes.
Yes, military. But before we discuss deeper about the military and maybe the influence of military movement in Indonesia, I remember two songs that I usually hear when I need to refresh my imagination from Sepultura. If you ever hear the Brazilian hardcore band, they have a song that titled "Fight for Territory," and the second one is "Propaganda." This song is full of anger, how they see the global government destroy the American citizen, destroy the Brazilian citizen, destroy the Argentinian and many of places in Indonesia. Indonesia one of many places destroyed by America. And the military of the global government. In these issues, I also remember what Gramsci ever wrote. He said that my skeptic is based on my knowledge, but my spirit comes from my ideology. I think this becomes important to us to see how the ideology become the key, not only to analyze how military become actor who play, I don't know if is it the right word or not, the dirt actor who always try to kill people, who always try to grab land, who try to manipulate maybe the democratization process in many places. In this context, I think Indonesian people usually who grew up in my era, who saw how the Reformation process, they still believe that military is one of my enemies. That is why our budgeting system doesn't give much of money to the military. So the problem for us now today, we doesn't have a military force that can face to face with Chinese government, with submarine from Australia, we become the country that so fragile to maintain our nationality, to maintain our security. Also, our military become an actor that they doesn't show to the public that they play on many of forestry issues. Military play their play their roles. I don't know. Is it roles is very specific word that we can use. But in the case of Papua, we see that gold mining, they use military force. In East Java, from many of our colleague research, military play their position to face with the local people. In this point, I see that sometimes, if we use in Durkheimian perspective, military, if they doesn't have any role in society, they will lose their norms and values. When they lose, I think this is something that Durkheim doesn't read it carefully, or Durkheim doesn't imagine when the words become changed like nowadays. Military make their own new rules to control the economic access, to control the market, to control and manipulate the voice of society. In this point, I think it's crucial for us then to discuss about the land issues and territories. For my opinion, I think we need to share our research. I ever have a research that conducted in enclave society near Jember, or also near Banyuwangi. Their society is only less than 400 family. They live in the small places, the small place that all the surrounded by the forest, but the forest has changed their function because the government need to maintain forest to become have economic values. Then they try to marginalize the community that inside of the forest, and they make many of regulation. What some researchers like Nancy Peluso say, the process of preparation of forest. What we can learn today, if Professor Grace have maybe comparison, but Indonesia or maybe some other places, how we as a young people, as a young researcher, and also as a student, can see how can forest change and how come forest become militarized, become owned by the military, become owned by the state. And is there any chance for us to have an access to the forest? Based on the data, every hours we lost at least maybe 4 times of what is called sepak bola. Football.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Maybe it's not big, but we count maybe months, years.
Yeah, it's a
wow,
lot.
it's very devastating for us, because forest, especially Indonesia forest, become one of small forests that government, it's not government, the world belief become the lung of the world. However, the military own it, the industry own it, The local community doesn't have access to it. I think it's issues that become crucial nowadays. Please enlighten us with your research experience about forestry and human rights, because I think there's a specific connection between human rights and forestry, and nowadays where the government and the industries have take all they need for the forest, but people doesn't have it. Please enlighten us.
Valuable experience.
Well, I mean, I think, you were talking about Nancy Peluso and her co-author, Peter van der Geest. They talk about this concept of political forests and how modern state regimes claimed forests as part of their sovereign territory. And I think that's the thing about forests is generally speaking, right, in the past and even today, they're very inaccessible to us. It's just difficult, right? It's most human population don't live there. This is not very densely populated, and I think what Peluso and van der Geest write about, the first stage of political forestry is when the state decides to make a claim and claim it as their territory. It's under their control, so that they can monopolize exploitation of forest resources, and it coincides with that period when they're building a lot and they're taking timber, and that's very important. And they saw a lot of, I think in Southeast Asia's case, and the case I'm just starting to learn more about in Southeast Asia, especially in Indonesia, but in Sri Lanka's case, right, they saw a lot of the traditional forest communities where they engage in swidden agriculture, which means they slashed and they burned it, and so the colonial government generally saw that as bad. They didn't see how these communities practice it. They just thought that's destructive. So they really wanted to kind of control how people use the forest and make them stay in one place also, so better to administer them, right, when they settle down and they don't move about, and also to integrate them into the economy, kind of compel them to work in modern plantations. A lot of it's very interesting. It's how integrated the vision for the forest was. So it solved, for the state, it solved many problems. It was so that the state can say, well, this is our territory, nobody lives here, and so we get to take what we like, and you people, your practices are destructive, stop that, and get out and go work in these plantations or something, and so, I forget the question, but
is there any possibilities for us to access the forest when the military, the government, and the global government control the forest? And second is, if there's any possibility that we can access, who can have the benefit? Is it the local community? Still have their own, still have their economic access there, or it will be claimed by. I think civil society is not the right concept. But the people who also have their needs to the forest, but they doesn't want to conserve the forest trees. I think it's a big issue about the forest nowadays. What do you think, based on the many of research you have conducted for the forest?
I think there's so much unregulated activity in the forest. illegal activity by commercial interests, not so much by resident communities. I mean, if that happens, it's very small scale. They're like by big, by large, more significant interests. And so I think the enforcement of forest use, the use of forest resources and exploiting the forests is very strict in a lot of countries because this is going on. And governments have an interest in being able to decide how the forest is used. So I think, yeah, this is true, right? Like the security, it's in Indonesia's case, right? The military. In other countries, it's not necessarily the military, but yeah, the security is very, very, very tight. And if it is kind of under global conservation governance, yes, it's also a very, it's also doesn't take, like what we found, me and a colleague from University of Ruhuna in Sri Lanka found in Sri Lanka's case, which Sri Lanka in Asia is very good at forest conservation. I mean, right now the government is not in good shape, but they were planning to even extend these protected forest areas, but they don't take to consideration like the people who live in the forest and that kind of integration. And so that's I think that's one of the challenges, because what they found is that, and consistently around the world, these different studies of when conservationists come in, and they basically displace the resident communities, they have a difficult time policing the forest because they don't have a military. I mean, the military, I think, is very specific spots, but they have a hard time, and when communities are displaced and they can't make their livelihood as they did before, they will resort to looking at the forest as a source of income to exploit for very limited, on a limited scale, because these are individuals, but they no longer have a relationship with the forest like they had when they were left undisturbed. They had a knowledge of the forest, of the ecosystem. They knew like how often you should use this before you come back. They knew how to the cycle, right, of the forest growth, and that when people are displaced, they're lost from that ecosystem that they were living in. So I think, when under global conservation, a lot of people have gotten displaced, and they're in Sri Lanka's case, they were encouraged to grow tea, to plant, instead of the Sweden agriculture, they were given loans, and a lot of subsidies to start their own individual tea plantations as individual households. So that broke up the community that used to engage together in the agriculture and share a lot of products and have a lot of community events around their harvesting. And so they became very individualistic, and they planted the tea for the market, and then the tea prices go down, and then their soil gets dried up, and then they buy more chemicals to make the tea grow, and so they're in this cycle of debt. And this is I think we're learning unfortunately from experience, but the idea that the forests need to be protected by people who have lived there for generations, that is an assumption, right? A very modernist assumption. We think we have superior scientific knowledge, but the people, who have long-standing presence there, they know how to live and help the forest regenerate. And they generally were not linked to the market, right? Because they're quite isolated, as we said, right? Traditionally, we didn't have access to ecotourism or something. But yeah, now they have ecotourism, and now they have, these people coming in wanting to buy non-timber, other forest products from them. And so if they can't grow tea, or they don't get enough income from tea, and they have to pay their loan, they start looking to the forest for, income generating activity. And so it makes it worse, right? Like this is something and not only in Sri Lanka's case, but in case after case around the world that people have studied.
Wow, another contradiction about the forestry. Ecotourism. Yes, many of places in Indonesia now practicing ecotourism.
Ecotourism, yes.
But they have to, what is called, bargain or negotiate with the buruh tani, the national company who maintain the forest. And maybe the local community only have less than 20% for their economic benefit. And the government of that, also the local government, also take their own need about the forest, not exploitation, but forest valuation, because there's new values in the forest. And then global political conservation. It's a big issue, but also I think it's like a glimpse of optimism there. Do you think that conservation in the future become more that is people want to participate with this global conservation, or based on Indonesia case where Indonesia try to conserve their forest, but Indonesia doesn't have much support from the international government. Is it still any chance for us to use this strategy to maintain our forest? Since in our journal we have journal that try to publish the idea of sociology. We call it contemporary sociology issues. One of our author highlight the issue of food.
Food estate.
Food estate.
Oh.
The idea might be the government wants to try like the real estates.
Yeah.
The government want to make a forest become the industry, and all of the commodities will easily planted there, and the government can harvest as much as they want.
Yeah.
Problem. Then the problem. We can discuss more about these issues if we have another time. But this is very, very new food estate. The government claims this strategy is already work on European society, but I don't think so. It's like a new strategy for land grabs. And the Dayak community or the local community there, they lost their access because the commodities that try to government use is based on the national agenda, where the Suharto era try to monopolize the commodities in national level, such as rice and cassava. I don't think so, but the main commodity that try to get explored more is sawit. What is called in English?
Palm oil.
Palm oil.
Oh yeah.
Because
Business.
it's
Good business also. Kalimantan is almost
Yeah.
because of the palm
Yeah.
oil plantation, I
Yeah.
think.
Many of water resource become lost
Mm-hmm.
because these commodities, and also how the industry, when they need to use the forest, they only need fire it, and all this pollution came to many of places like in Australia, not Australia,
Malaysia.
Malaysia and
Mhm.
Singapore,
Mm-hmm.
and the government doesn't know how to maintain this.
Mm-hmm.
Although the government gave some subsidies to industries, but again,
For food estate.
not for
Or
food estate.
palm oil,
Palm
different
oil,
okay,
yes.
different export products
Yes.
too. Okay.
That's why it's become a new idea that we can believe can be more inclusive for us if we use the term of global political conservation.
Yeah, yeah, and I think like global conservation has one of the things that some in the literature review, some people did a very exhaustive literature review, and that most of these conservation policies are done by scientists, and they want to preserve, they want to conserve and protect forests, but they don't really care, or they don't think about people, you know, they tend to have a thinking, kind of, there's a genealogy of this thinking that all people are invasive species, you know, and that, their solution is to create a wilderness, right? Like that everybody who's there is an intruder and is going to damage the forest, and so now there's this very exhaustive literature reviews show like there's very little social science written about it, and like they're starting to have the kind of connections, right, together, social scientists working together with the natural scientists studying like the conservation, and because like we said, we found that the displaced communities are displacing them, it doesn't necessarily protect the forest very well. I think they or other people will start using the forest unless you have a very intrusive dominant military, like, but most places don't have that, so that it's very ineffective. You know, they found that it's frustrating. Forest conservation can be frustrating, but if you include people, right, you acknowledge that, yeah, there are some customary rights. I know this is a topic we're kind of interested in exploring some more, but I think some of the works that I was reading about Sri Lanka, the international conservation scientists, you know, they, even when they acknowledge that, yeah, we should include the local community and they can be an agent in helping preserve, but they're like, but it's, you know, it's too urgent. We don't have time to do that. Like for them, they're so like, it's very interesting, the attitude, right? They care so much about nature, which is nice, right? But they're in such a hurry because it's the rate of deforestation is incredible. It's really, I mean, it's astounding. So I think that now if we can have these more interdisciplinary collaborations, right, and think about how we use the forest. I mean, I don't know anything about the food estate idea. I mean, I feel like the world food system is in crisis, and our solution, again, is to do more of the same, which is industrialized food production, which is scientifically found, right, that's not sustainable. Yeah, you can do that and it's fine, but then it's not sustainable. It's like palm oil. Those trees only have, you know, how many, a couple of decades, and then they're no use, and their land is no use, right? You have to find somewhere else to plant. So these are things like natural scientists and social scientists can kind of work together. Like, I don't know if you were familiar with that Global Food Summit, World Food Summit last year, right? And there was there's been a big movement, right, with the food sovereignty, agroecology movement, and I think to me that's a very inspiring movement. This kind of peasant-led movement, like one is the La Via Campesina, which started in Mexico. It's the way of the farmer, La Via Campesina, Spanish word, and they have a global network. Like they help to promote like farmers continuing to grow food the way they always have, and they've engaged with a lot in all these different sites with scientists and universities who help to understand why this is more sustainable. And because you don't, when you have agricultural, industrialized agriculture, you rely a lot on chemical inputs that are not good for the land ultimately. I forget about your health, but just like ultimately the fertility of the land, right, is diminished by that, and also they don't survive natural like weather disasters, right? Like whereas native crops, right, they're much more resilient. They recover much more quickly. So they found all of this, and so La Via Campesina is one with a global network, and then MST is a Brazilian peasant-based, farmer-based movement, because farmers keep getting displaced from their land, right, forced off their land, and so they started, and they have a method. They have like a school, they share knowledge about how to preserve seeds, right, how to kind of engage in like the local production. So I think there's a lot of knowledge now, and a lot of collaborations that are interdisciplinary between natural science and social science. And so I think, we can't let the old model, which, has failed in so many places.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, there's so many examples. It's just, it's not sustainable, which is one of the things we were interested, right, in touching upon.
Is it because our common enemy is now climate change?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is it true? Because we have a common enemy. Is it the name is climate change over the global?
If you believe in that.
Many people doesn't believe it.
How about in Indonesia? How was the?
Since our researchers have a big opportunity to doing research about global change, then many researchers try to write a proposal and try to promote that we on the situation that the global warming is happening. Although we can experience that now the world has become warmer, but some places still have their own air conditioner. So global warming is also happen, but many of, especially middle class, think that that's happened. Okay, but I don't care. I need to make myself feel comfortable.
Yeah.
Many students demand that they need to study in the place where air conditioner is on. And that's why and then at the end of the day, when the lecturer said that stop global warming, but their house is full of electricity.
Right, yeah, that's true.
Stop global warming, but they need the internet.
Yeah.
They need the Wi-Fi. They need all the privileges. They need to continue their life using motorcycle, using cars, and many things that people doesn't want to change how their daily activity. In Indonesia, we know that our government increased the price of the oil, but no one has changed their life by using bicycles. Maybe in this building, only Mas Hanif use bicycle when I also using bicycle when I need to use it. I try to ride my bicycle to this campus and need at least 45 minutes.
Yeah.
That's why when people already have their comfort zone, many of issues become absurd for them. That is why there's as a sociology, comfort zone is always challenging.
Yeah. How do you get people to sacrifice, like put their money where their mouth is, right? You care so much about climate change, then stop contributing to the problem. Stop driving and air. Yeah, like this summer I was not in California, but when I came back in September, before I came here, it was so hot. It's never been that hot. It's hotter than here even. Like it's never, and also humid, and it's never humid. San Diego's like desert. It's dry. It's really nice weather. And when the weather got warm, everyone turned on the air conditioning, and then the power outage. Like we kept getting on our phone, warning like turn off your power, don't use power between these hours, or you might have an outage, or we might have to do a rolling outage. I mean, everyone I think already has air conditioning. Like I think developing countries, not everyone does, and so people feel maybe, not everyone has it, the majority of people don't, it's not a big deal. But like in California, everyone has it, and so many people have it anyway, and so it put a strain. We don't have enough power to live like this with the weather being as unpredictable and unusual as it is.
It reminds me why the U.S. government doesn't want to taking part on what is Kyoto Protocol. We talk without I know it, right?
What do you think? Why your government doesn't want to ratify the Kyoto Protocol?
I think it's too costly for business. The big businesses that I think are very have a lot of influence on the government. I think it's also I don't think they believe it can be associated with their activities. They don't necessarily believe in the science that connects their business activities with how things are changing as far as
Although many of scientists, maybe there's a new social movement there in America that promote the issue of global warming. The government still doesn't want to change their minds.
Oh yeah, most scientists. I mean, very very few. There's some that are loud and there's a few, very few, but the scientific community overall agrees that certain activities contribute to this, and can, if we curb those, we can help mitigate them, it's not, among the scientific community, it's not like a debate. It's a really, I think, small, marginal proportion that might have questions about it.
Although people in Alaska, every year they have to fight their climate change. Many of ice become melted.
I think because you cannot see the connection between your air conditioner and your driving with there's icebergs melting. You can't you can't prove it to people who don't maybe understand the scientific methods. And I don't understand the scientific methods like a scientist does, but the scientists have they all, at least, there's established methodologies you can't just go in and make things up, right? They also have peer review. They also have these kinds of standards. So, I mean, I trust the scientists. I trust the science. I don't trust people who are like, oh, I don't believe it. And I went as far as 8th grade science. Like, you don't, I don't care about your opinion if you finished science when you were 14 and that was the last time. You shouldn't have an opinion about science, you know, like leave it to the experts.
Who owned the forest in United States?
Also the state, yeah, public property, yeah. Yeah, and that's an interesting history too. Like a lot of native people were displaced when they created like, national forests, for example. And I think like the perception was when people didn't use the land the way that Europeans or European descendants did, that they weren't using the land. And so, they saw it as empty space, and they saw, whenever people moved into it as intruders, so they created these are kind of out of the public's reach. And so they're like national parks or reserves. I mean, I think the history behind it is not very kind as far as, some of I can't remember the historian who has written about this, a few historians have written about this. Like they kind of see it as a way of displacing the natives. And I mean, today, obviously, it's nice that we have these beautiful areas preserved, but, the background to it is in part that, we want to kind of force them into contained areas.
Yes, because sometimes it becomes difficulties to make a theoretical conceptual framework. Many of researchers that we use their book, such as James Scott, Clifford Geertz, many of American people who studied in Indonesia, there's a specific concept that we cannot use in Indonesia. Peasantry, farmer, and the concept is very different with Europe and America, because many of people here have their land is very large.
Right. In Europe?
In America.
Well, whose land? Who?
Like maybe in California.
Like of individual families?
Individual.
Sometimes, not always. Yeah.
Yes, of course.
Yeah,
Sometimes not. But in Indonesia, the Gini index said that our peasant, their land is less than 1 hectare. That is why if the farmer doesn't goes aggressively to enter the forest, they will not have any food.
Yeah.
In Java especially. It's of course it's different with in Kalimantan or Borneo or in Sumatra. But Java is forest. Forest in Java is the territory is owned by the state gives to the farmer and then give to the peasant, and the peasant still need hard to have benefit from the forest. No,
I mean, it's hard to just relocate and adjust to forests. I think, and it's usually collective, right? The work to produce food is collective, and it's subsistence. I think a lot of the traditional, they're producing their food is for their own consumption, and they might have other things that they sell in the market, but they don't. It's not like, I don't know. Are you talking about government trying to help people feed themselves, or help people establish products for the market?
The government tried to create the land. For example, for coffee plantation, the local people use forest to make their own coffee plantation.
Yeah.
However, they doesn't have the security system. What just happened in Jember is a specific example. People who live in highland, they already have their coffee. Their coffee is ready to harvest. Then there's another people came to their land and take all the coffee.
Oh, steal it.
Stealing
Wow. But there is a big plantation?
No, it's family
Yeah, but
plantation.
still, wow. Yeah.
And then
No, it's
the
dangerous. Yeah.
palace, it's very far.
Mhm.
The transportation is very hard to get there.
It is, yeah.
And then
It's a lot of work to steal other people's coffee.
some place I only can access by horse.
Yeah.
But who have horse?
Wow. That's industrious.
Yes. Oh, that's
Yeah, people don't have a way to make an honest living, right? So, yeah, it's such a I was reading about the social forestry because Indonesia, right, the government some years ago, right, introduced this concept of social forestry to integrate the community in the management of the forest and forest resources. I just started looking at this, so I don't have deep knowledge, but the World Resource Initiative found that they did a study and found that the rate of deforestation hasn't really stopped, and that's because, the people have been, they're not used to, I think, the traditional ways of living with the forest as part, as stewards of the forest, because they've been displaced for so long. Like to suddenly introduce people, right, to this like there's a lot of loss of knowledge about how the ecosystem there works, and there's also a loss of values, and it's not. I think from what I've studied in Sri Lanka and the readings about other parts of the world, in the past it was collective production, and now, the village that we were discussing, my Sri Lankan colleague and I were discussing, like they were displaced about 25, now nearly 30 years ago, and everybody has their own plantation, and they don't have the ceremonies anymore where they do the harvesting together. And they used to have a monk that lived in their village full time, all the time. And now the monk doesn't. The monk is kind of, goes from place to place, and traditional medicine is no longer, because they can't gather the medicine in the forest. And they take the bus to go to the hospital in town, which costs money. Before it was free. They just lived together. They were outside the cash economy. So for the most part, like they sold some things in a nearby market, and then they would buy some things from the town. But for the most part, they were not like, their economy wasn't monetized, and now their economy is fully monetized. So. And they're very individualistic. So I think it's probably what happened, right? To reintroduce it is a challenge when you just bring individuals who, like, a value system is a part of a community, and it's enforced through the community, right? The community has its own mechanisms to ensure that kind of resource use management.
But I'm sure that we can maybe conduct research better, since you have intention about the social forestry, and now she has tried to write a proposal about the forestry that's connected to the issue of human rights and also the indigenous community. I think we will become our future collaboration about the forest issue and also the human right. Is there any?
There's a long discussion we have here.
More from some of us than others. Your turn to speak.
No, I think there's a interesting one. Wait, I'm thinking about the indigenous people. Yeah. There's I have read some research that told about the indigenous people face many problems. Yeah, I think yes. One side we talk about the forest conservation and the ecotourism. It's all about the territory, I think. And then another problem is there is but others indigenous community or other kinds of communities that then also claim their territory sometimes. I don't know, but that's the main in my thinking. Actually, is that the main one of the main problem that it is very hard to to maintain or to control some indigenous prosperity. What is poverty? Not poverty. Property, indigenous property, because for the indigenous community they have to struggle to claim their property, fight with, I don't know, not fight, vis-a-vis with the state, and then vis-a-vis with investor perhaps for the investing model, and then model accumulation, and then face to face with the other communities. That's how I mean, is there any mechanism? Perhaps you can tell from your experience how they can struggle through that problem.
I mean, for indigenous people specifically, yeah, it's, I don't know. I mean, now there's more of a movement, right? Globally, there's a nice connection with the world. Indigenous peoples kind of get together and they, I think they support each other. And I think what's unique about the idea, right, the kind of rights, indigenous rights that they claim is that they're very, very conscious of preserving their culture. I think, like that's they're not going to just go back and engage in the market economy, right? They want to kind of recover their way of life and be able to practice that. And so I think that's always, I think, very positive for the, if they can claim their land rights, land use rights, and other customary rights. That's. I know that for example, Indonesia's case, right? They have to prove, right? They have to map out where they claim is should have land use, customary land use rights, and the government doesn't provide for that. Like, they have to make their own case, right? And so it's a really big challenge they're not able, obviously they're among the more marginalized people in every society are indigenous people, and now they have to go and do this mapping. But there are like I think the World Resource Initiative and what is the Aman in Indonesia, like they're helping with mapping this, and then the process though is so difficult for them. I think that it's difficult. It's, Hery talked about in Hawaii, it's difficult in America, it's a very challenging, and I think the declaration, the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, like that has a lot of nice ideas, but it doesn't have the force yet, but I think the communities, hopefully they keep advocating together, and others advocate also, because I think they're very, very conscious about preserving and their knowledge and living like a way that is in tune with sustainability, right? With the nature, protecting nature, versus I think the rest of us, right? We might want rights, but I think we don't kind of have those roots in nature anymore. We're kind of a generation, we're displaced from that. And so I think that's what I appreciate about the Indigenous rights movement. They're very, very self-conscious about, these are our traditional practices, these are things we want to reestablish and return to that kind of livelihood, because that's our identity.
I'm afraid they come to another track, like commodification. I think none of that. I'm not a pessimistic person, but sometimes when we talk about the cultural preservation, like how then our indigenous community maintains and try to make it like a little bit local wisdom than local wisdom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But then in another another challenge is that very valuable thing, being what is the market demand, like it can be something that economy can grab, like that.
Mm-hmm.
So the concept of ecotourism, I don't think it. Yes, perhaps in one way it's a good movement that the indigenous people have right to their prosperity, like that. But in another thing is how it will not go to the such an economic trap, like a commodification.
Mm-hmm.
I just wonder how.
Yeah.
Big challenge.
There are a lot of problems. I think a lot of concerns about ecotourism already, right? In places that have kind of allowed people into protected areas as ecotourists, and a lot of the activities, are hard to control. I think once people who don't appreciate it, and they treat it as a commodity, the experience is a commodity, the place is a commodity. But people who don't think that way, right? It's fair. Yeah, I think the farmer movements like La Via Campesina and MST, the farmer movements, like they're really into. They're not indigenous people, right? Many of them they're people who work the land, right? They know the land. They have ties to the land, and they're trying to preserve that, right? Trying to preserve the knowledge and their understanding. Like, you don't have to be indigenous people to have a connection with nature, right?
They don't have to be indigenous people to connect with nature. It's solid words, but have a strong idea behind it. It's a great idea.
Those groups, I think Via Campesina and MST and movements like that, they have like presence. They have like chapters. I don't know what they call it in Southeast Asia, like in the Philippines and Thailand. Maybe I don't know if in Indonesia. But they try to protect, also protect people who live off the land from being displaced, because all these things happen when you're displaced. You can't live off the land, and you are many people find it very hard, right, to find a livelihood, a stable livelihood.
It's very intense discussion.
Kind
of new knowledge that we have from your experience, your research, and also your expertise.
Oh, yours too. I mean, I'm learning from all of this as well, and about Indonesia and what's happening here too. Mm-hmm.
I'm speechless, but I think we still have the chance to make ourselves calm and believe that there's still future for us and for our children to see and to feel how it's like to have a forest, how it's like to feel the air on the mountain. I myself, when I was young, I go to the mountain and talk to the local community about their land and mountain. Now, sometimes I feel skeptical, but sometimes when I learn many from many of my colleagues, from you, there's a new movement that on their way to promote the environmental issues. I still believe that there's still a chance for us, Indonesian people, because it is important because we live in Katulistiwa, that is equator.
Equator line.
We live there, and the weather is changed dramatically. But now we see that citizens sometimes they looks like aware about the global warming. Sometimes they're not, but I think our teenager, our student, maybe they have their own idea about the global warming.
Yeah, right.
Maybe they will use their own strategy to promote and how to protect. I think it's now we at the end of our discussion. Thank you, Prof. Grace Cheng, for your time.
Thank you for your time, for your knowledge, for everything.
No, thank you for your knowledge and your exchange, and I think that's the key, right? Like I think my students also, they have a very different attitude. They're very critical, so I think that's good. They're seeing the mistakes, they're seeing, and hopefully we can continue to be knowledgeable. I remember there were some professors when I was a student, like they never changed their notes. I was the teaching assistant for this one professor, and his notes were like yellow, and I said, people don't say that anymore. And then he said, why don't you do the lecture? But I think if we keep up, we have to keep up the knowledge, like you have to be responsible for like thinking, okay, does this make sense? Like, is this true? Like, just keep exploring, and hopefully, because our students don't learn what we learned 30 years ago, right? It should continue.
I thought that's only happening in Indonesia.
No.
Now I know.
It's happening in
Thank you.
Thank you so much.